Hi, and welcome to another episode of Thrive at the Top, a podcast for leaders, managers, directors, executives, anyone who's responsible or in charge of people in their workplaces. Okay, so today the topic of discussion is aviation mental health, and we are focusing today, as always, on real life case studies so we can bring our message home. We want to talk about today about the 2015 incident of the Germanwings aircraft that crashed under the co-pilot. I believe his name was Andreas. Right. So I'll give you a quick context of the story. So this plane, when it left its original destination, everything was fine. There were two pilots in the plane, and everything was going okay. Obviously the rocks had a record of the last 30 minutes. That led to the investigation and to the conclusion that the pilot, Andreas, deliberately crashed the aeroplane. Right. So this is what they found, obviously, from the cockpit box, that it was deliberate him crashing the plane. Okay, so it's not me that's insinuating kind of the conclusion. They, after the investigation, they came up with these conclusions. Right. So in the last 30 minutes, right, there's within the recording, Andreas was heard talking normally with his captain, and then there's a time that the captain said he's getting up and he's going to the toilet, assuming he was going to the toilet. So he left and went out. So it's within this time that Andreas decided to do everything else that transpired that led to the crash of the aircraft. Apparently he didn't say anything, he was not heard saying anything. The moment the captain exited the cockpit, this is the feedback from the control that the trajectory was changed, that it started to decrease, and this is one of the indicators why they could tell that it was deliberate. The flight, and this is me paraphrasing, he changed the altitude to start decreasing. The control tried to communicate with him to try and understand what was happening, have a conversation with him. He did not respond. Right. So then the speed increased, the altitude decreased, and they tried to contact him. Other airplanes that were around tried to contact, and there was no answer. His captain returned, was able to access the door to come back into the cockpit, and then shortly after, the airplane crashed. Hard is the ground, instant death of the passengers. So as a result of this incident, there was immediate recommendation and change to what they call the two-person cockpit, that there should always be two people in the cockpit at any given time. This was a response to the incident where obviously Andreas by himself led to the immediate crash. The aviation industry airlines decided to do the two-person cockpit rule, that there should always be two pilots in the cockpit. This is obviously an attempt to manage the risk, right, and the challenges of any incident in order to eliminate the challenges. If someone tries to do something, there's always be another person in the cockpit. So what we want to talk about today is, while this two-person cockpit rule addressed immediate risk, it did not, in my conclusion or my recommendation is that they did not deal with the underlying issue or underlying pressure that pilots experience in their job or in their work on a day-to-day basis. So historically, right, the aviation industry has been known for its advancement in technical risk in managing any advancement within that side of things. But in the human management side of issues, I believe it's where things should fall. And I believe that operationalizing mental health within the industry has been complex. Stringent regulations and deep-seated stigma has been the cause of pilots to date being reluctant to seek help and to open up about their challenges because of the repercussions that fall with these admissions. And this, I think, is the result of the ongoing challenges of managing mental health risk within the aviation industry itself. So in this episode, really, I want to focus on the importance of having foundational frameworks to manage fatigue, to manage stress and burnout, rather than just moving into reactive strategies of managing the risk. I want us to learn, move beyond awareness and move into action and having proactive frameworks, foundational framework in order to manage mental health challenges that are faced in each industry. So this episode and this podcast is really about offering actionable strategies and to have actionable conversations. So that when you do leave this episode, you're actually having tangible, actionable strategies, tools, insights to take back into your industry, into your workplace. So at this time, I want to introduce to you our SAFE pillars, which is a framework, which is our proprietary framework that we use to help industries and organizations operationalize or implement mental health strategies, programs, and tools into their workplaces. Okay, so today I want to focus on F, which is foundations and framework. So if awareness is like identifying that there's a fire, right? Foundations is when you move to putting in. F, foundations, is when you actually move to putting in place fire prevention strategies. Okay, so there's a difference. Now we're awareness, there's a fire. F is putting in preventable strategies, so to prevent, so fire prevention strategies, right? This is the analogy. I can make this understandable. Okay, so with our F framework, which is how we support organizations, we would look at this situation and say, okay, the cockpit rule addresses the immediate risk, right? But however, it does not address the root cause, right, of this problem. Identifying mental health risk, and also identifying and creating programs and tools and strategies to help with fatigue, stress, burnout, and identifying any risk that our pilots or even the rest of our crew could be experiencing. So we want every industry to move beyond just being aware. It's now what can we do? Because I always talk about when you identify a problem, it's like, okay, no judgment. I will always advocate for no judgment. If you look at my previous episodes, I come from an industry where we always critically reflect on the past. What lessons are we getting? What are the patterns, right? What is being given back? What's the feedback that's been given back? And what can we now, with insight, with the information that we have, what can we do better in mostly primarily best practice moving forward? So based on this Germanwings German incident, right, we've learned that, okay, so if he's crashing the plane, that means there was something wrong with him. So now how do we move to avoid or to eliminate that this incident does not happen again? And I believe the cockpit rule, immediately, yes, it takes the immediate danger away, but I believe it's reactive, right? Yes, we've put this rule now, but now how can we deal with the root cause of the problem? What led to him to crash the plane? Is there something that we can do now to help our pilots so that they don't get to the stage where they crash the plane? That's essentially what we're talking about. With the information that we have, what can we now put in place to support our pilots, right? To help them do their job better is simply what we're saying now. How can we help them do their job better so that they don't get to the extent where the solution for them is to crash the plane? What foundations really mean within our SAFE Pillars framework is simply about, firstly, embedding formal, systematic support, not just compliance. It's ensuring that we have formal systems in place that support our pilots and not just a tick box procedure. And what would that look like? It would look like putting in place fatigue training programs, right? It would mean having mental health private consultation service or program for our pilots with no judgment and no repercussions, right? And it would also mean having mandatory recovery days after long haul runs. That's an example of putting in place a system of support for the pilots. So what are the benefits of really having fatigue assessments? This is because, for example, I talked about being really technical within the aviation industry, where we make sure as part of their training that they are aware of their engines, of their aircraft, right? They're not guessing. They're not working on their gut when they're working with managing the aircraft altogether, how to move it, how to understand the readings and everything, right? It's not based on their gut, instinct. It's based on training. It's based on data that's given through procedural training that they should have and a certain understanding, right? A lot of the mental health support, we're still bringing it, we're still basing it on feeling, or otherwise there's nothing in place at all to actually assess and identifying on data how our pilots are managing fatigue, stress, burnout, right? So if you actually have tangible systems, tangible formal systems that support, not to remove, not to blame, not to bench, but to actually just manage fatigue of the pilots, because openly and genuinely people do get tired. So we should not treat fatigue as a disease. We should not treat overwhelm, right, as a disease. Comes with part and parcel of the job itself. And I was having a discussion at the event with one of the gentlemen I met who's in the aviation industry, right, where our conversation was going around his frustration was most well-being conversations are really about a social adjustment. That's what they're trying to do, socially adjust, adapt the physical elements of the job, which sometimes it cannot be changed, right? The long hours, right, of the pilots that they have. A flight is 8, 12, 16, whatever hours. We cannot change that, right? Whether they're flying from, let's say, I know one of the longest flights I take is from Australia to the UK, right? I'll have to go through Doha, which is a 14-hour flight from Melbourne to Doha, right? And then I take a break, right? So I can only imagine someone's concentration, right? And they're controlling and managing and flying this plane. I know there's automation within the flying, but obviously 14-hour shift is a long shift. That's the honest thing about it. So rather than, we cannot change that. What we can change is our ability to support our pilots in this job structure as it stands, right? How are we supporting them in this situation? What do we have in place to dictate or to identify fatigue? And when we do identify fatigue, what are we doing about it? Are we blacklisting them? Are we taking them off the roster, right? Or do we have something in place to really help them identify themselves? And as an industry, are we taking ownership that these are the hours, this is the stress that comes with the job, right? This is the impact that it has on our pilots. So how can we best equip them? How can we best support them given the current circumstances, right? And this is what we're talking about, having systems, having a framework to support our pilots to manage fatigue, to manage stress, to manage burnout. That has to become now an industry responsibility and not an individual responsibility. Why? Because the whole industry itself, regarding managing the machinery, managing aircraft, the engine, is not an individual basis. It's not a gut feeling. They are trained to know and to understand their engine and all the equipment. Similarly, let's move to data-driven information regarding supporting our pilots. How do we know they're fatigued? It's a simple assessment that we do. And then from the data given, how do we then support them? What's our recovery for a long haul? Is it working? Has it ever been reviewed since the last time it was put in place? How much time do they physically, practically need in order to recover before they go for the next flight? What's the schedule? What's the roster? How many long haul flights are they doing per week, per month? And does this need to be reviewed? And who's reviewing it? Not just the organizational department somewhere up there. It has to be in partnership with the pilots themselves, because they're the ones doing the work. How do you feel when you've rested 5 hours, 6 hours, over 24 hours? How do you feel? Do you think you need more time? Do you need... These are the ongoing conversations. So when we set foundations and frameworks and policies within the organization, it has to be in partnership with the people that are doing the work. Are you getting feedback that whatever time or scope timeline you've set for them, is it really impactful? Is it helping them? Are they really rested, right? These are the conversations that we need to start having between the management and the actual pilot or the people doing the work. Number 2, the second framework that we need to be putting in place is operationalizing resilience, not just encouraging it. And what does this look like? It's actually training the leaders to be able to, the leaders and the managers to recognize cumulative fatigue signals, right? And this is simply a training program or ongoing training and support for the leaders to be able to identify accumulative, fatigue signals within their pilots, within their crew staff, right? So again, it's not left to an individual, because aviation training, I know cabin crew training is not left to individual. Therefore, fatigue management should be an industry-led program, right? Where you need to be training your leaders and your managers into identifying cumulative risks, fatigue signals. And we're not saying now that the team leaders and the managers now become counselors, now they become therapists, right? We are not saying this because this is not what they're trained to do. However, there should be a foundational level or standard of understanding and being able to identify these signals. And this is simply offering some training to your leaders every so often throughout the year. I believe all industries already have some ongoing training, some updates, right? Training that they have every so often, quarterly, monthly, yearly, right? So similarly, within the skills, you have something in place to offer training to your managers and to your leaders and to the rest of the staff. Similarly, mental health resilience, right, should also have some ongoing training for the leaders and for the crew staff. And within operationalizing resilience, implementing resilience, that's what I mean, is also to offer psychological safety for disclosures. What do I mean by this? That the whole industry, the whole culture, right, should make its staff feel safe to disclose how they are genuinely feeling. Right. I believe that when there's a culture where people know there are no serious repercussions, and I'm saying there should not be consequences, obviously, there's a certain level of risk within the industry itself, so there should be some consequences when people do certain things. But I'm saying within the disclosures and acknowledging of fatigue. Like I said, fatigue is unavoidable. Fatigue is extreme tiredness, right? There should not be repercussions for someone disclosing that they're fatigued, right? There should not be repercussions for someone disclosing that they are overwhelmed or they're stressed right now, right? And simply identifying where is the stress. Sometimes the stress is work-related, right? And sometimes the stress is coming from home. Maybe they're going through a challenging or difficult time, family, relationships, financial, could be anything that's affecting their work, right? So you should be able to be creating a psychologically safe environment. Psychological safety is about making sure your staff are safe. There's been a study that was done in the 1980s. It's called the monkey. I'll put it in the show notes. It says something about, they did a study that when people only feel safe when the leaders make them feel safe, right? And then when they're safe, then they're able to do their job. And this is what I'm encouraging within the workplace. If all your staff are always on heightened mode, flight or fight mode, that they dare disclose they're fatigued, they dare disclose that they are stressed, that's not good for the brain. The signs of stress is one. When you're always stressed, it shrinks the brain. When you're always overthinking and in stress mode, it shrinks the brain. So what you don't want to do, you want to create a high performance environment where people are thriving, where people are thinking clearly and people can make quick decisions, right? Stress affects decision-making ability. The more stressed you are, the less you're able to respond quickly. Your decision-making skills are hampered, deteriorate with the more stress that you have. So you need to be understanding the science or the psychological effects of people staying in flight, fight mode all the time. You as the leader or the manager of your organization, it is your responsibility to create an environment where people are not stressed about disclosing these issues, this fatigue or stress or burnout that we're talking about, because that's naturally going to affect their decision-making skills. It's going to affect their cognitive skills. It's going to affect their thinking skills. Therefore, you've already lowered their ability to do their job just by not creating a psychologically safe environment. So I know psychological safety is a buzzword right now, right? But I thought let me go a bit deeper and give you a picture of the science behind stress and the effects of staying in heightened mode, of flight, fight mode. You're tensing the muscles, right? A blood flow into the brain is all going to be affected. So some people become blurred, right? Blurry vision. That's because they're stressed in the fight, flight mode, right? That affects you, your blurred vision. You don't want your pilots to start having sight problems. And I know this is one of the assessment, the measures that you have, your eyesight, right? But simply sometimes it's because they're stressed, simply because they are worried that they disclose something and then they're going to be, off the roster, right? So it's your responsibility as the manager, right, or as the leader to make sure you've created a psychologically safe environment where they can safely disclose the way they're feeling, and they know what we like to say, the money has got their back. They know there are no repercussions because they're seeking help. So that's a responsibility that you're going to have to put in place. Like this doesn't come second nature, but you can train your leaders and your managers to create a psychologically safe environment. It's an ongoing training every so often that you can implement within your workforce so that your pilots and your crew cannot be stressed, cannot be worried about when I get unwell, can be worried about when I get stressed, I will not have support. So not the stress isn't even happened at all, or the fatigue hasn't happened, but it's something in the back of the head that if or when I can't even disclose this. So that anxiety of when something does happen, the existence of that anxiety on its own is actually affecting the ability of workforce to stay at top. So what am I suggesting? I would not be talking about this without giving you tangible tools and things to put in place. So the first one you can put is pre-flight wellness checks. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It's a quick check that they answer a quick survey, similarly to the one they have a physical check, right? Pre-flight assessments to see if they're mentally fit to take the flight. Post-incident debriefs with a mental health lens, right? So now you're talking about, in my previous work, we used to call it clinical supervision, right? So you could have this within your industry where it doesn't have to take long. I know people are busy and it's sort of like adding additional work load to already a busy workload, but mental resilience of your workforce is important and you need to prioritize this, right? So post-incident debriefs with the mental health lens, right? And weekly resilience radar reports from team leads. So you are just reporting every week, just feedbacks in terms of what are you seeing within your staff, conversations you're having, right? Then it has to be part of the culture where it's normal to have these check-ins, right? Because both you as a leader and both your team know why we're doing this, because we want to keep everybody safe. We're not saying people are sick, we're not saying people are mad, right? We're putting things in place to early dictate anything that might happen. And if the earlier the things are dictated, the better the outcomes. And that's simply, you want to get a feeling before you have to move to a root canal. We already work like this, right? I need to put things in place so that I don't have to go to a worse situation. The moment you get some physical pain, it's an indication of something, right? Toothache, there must be something happening there. If I leave that ongoing, the next thing I'm going to lose the tooth. If I ignore the signals, right? Similarly, these check-ins I'm talking about, the pre-flight, the post-incident debriefs, and the weekly resilience radars, they're not saying there's a problem. It's just putting things in place to safeguard, to early dictate the early toothache signs that require regular clean, might be the solution, right? Taking less sugar. And I know I'm going overboard, but I want you to understand that when you early dictate something, then there are things that you can do quickly or effectively to minimize symptoms so that you don't end up losing the tooth. And in this scenario, you don't end up losing pilot or losing your crew altogether, where they cannot work. This is where we don't want to go. Or in this scenario where Andreas ended up crashing the plane. This is the end. This is the extreme end of the scenario. There are things that we can put in place so that we do not get to that scenario where we lost a pilot and we lost passengers. Catastrophic. That's the extreme end. But I believe there are things that you can put in place to dictate and to support and to catch and support your workforce so that the outcome is easier. We already spoke briefly about you creating a culture where you normalize having these conversations, but I just want to go a bit deeper into step 3 of what you can put in place. This is normalizing help seeking, right? So where it becomes normal for your team or your workforce to seek help. How do we put this in place? You could have, for example, storytelling to remove stigma at the top, where leaders share experiences, have conversations with their workforce, and this is due to normalize that mental health. There are things that can be put in place. They've got the health promotion strategies, right? So we're not saying there's anything wrong, but we want to keep our brain safe. We want to keep our brain clear. We don't want to end up having a scenario where there's brain fog, where you start getting, headaches and tiredness and exhaustion. Sometimes it's simply about debriefing, being able to speak to somebody about what's happening in your world, maybe at home or at work, right? Simply, I refer again to what I know is clinical supervision. You could call it debriefing, right? Where they simply have conversations with their managers just about, the things that are happening in their work or at home, okay? We could call them wellbeing captains, for example, right? This could be something you can embed in your system, right? And I talk about something that has been implemented in the mining industry. I think the company is called Blue Collar something. I would have to get the name right. Where within the mining sites, the reflectors, right? You have the orange, you have the yellow reflectors. What they've done now in some parts of mining have mental health people, mental health first aid, whatever you want to call it, mental health first aider or mental health person, right? They wear blue. They wear the blue reflector. So everybody around them knows that this person is what they're representing, right? It's someone you can go to talk to. If something, is required, there is a person on site to support the team. So this could be something that could also be implemented. I think it would be an excellent example to put it within the team, within the workforce. I'm not sure where, right? It's a conversation you can have within the organization, how you can have a wellbeing captain embedded within the crew so that they know this is their go-to person, maybe in a particular flight or on their destination, maybe on ground or during a flight. That's something that you could put in place. Yes, and then integrate mental health metrics into performance, right? with performance reviews and safety dashboards. So like I said, we've already got performance, we've already got our KPIs in workplaces where everyone has to maintain a certain standard, right? You have your goals for the year, your KPIs, you already got your reviews, right? So similarly, there should be well-being metrics, right? Just measurements of how you're performing, how you're feeling, right? And if there's anything that falls below the standard, then maybe it's just a case of a review of the policies, it's a case of review of the workload of the person, and maybe a review of their current situation. Like I said, there might be different things happening in people's lives. They might be going through a divorce, they might be going through a difficult time with their spouse in their relationship, maybe someone in the family is unwell, a partner, their parent, the elderly parent, the child is in hospital, might be anything, and that causes stress on the person. Because remember, we want to offer human-centric support. We need to remember our people. So the stress does not necessarily always come from work. It could be from home. How are you supporting? Do you know what's going on? And I'm not saying you have to know everything about your person, but you should be able to understand, and they should be able to come to you and say, I'm going through this stressful time at home right now. Just need more time, I need more support. Like I said, sometimes it's just a conversation. Maybe it's brief counseling, something about they need to be seeing someone for the next 3 or 4 weeks to debrief, to give them coping strategies and how to manage the situation at home, because it's affecting their work, right? And then after a couple of sessions, they are cleared, everything's okay. And then you've put early prevention strategies. You have put in something in place that can stop the tooth ending up being a root canal, just by simply offering these things in place. Last one that I really like to drive home, is having data-driven culture shift. And this is, for example, where in Complete Wellbeing Global, our organization, we come in and we offer quarterly safe pillars diagnostic. So ideally, they should be run quarterly, right? Every quarter, where your crew, where your managers, where your pilots do an anonymous assessment, baselines, just to measure, to track stress, fatigue, burnout, and psychological safety of the environment. Remember, we talked about the environment has to be safe for them to feel safe and to be able to thrive at their optimum level, right? So, for example, our diagnostic is something we offer to organizations. It's an anonymous questionnaire where we read the culture of the environment, where we understand where they are in terms of stress and fatigue, right, and burnout. And based on the findings of this diagnostic tool, we now tailor our support based on the findings. So yes, we are experts, but we're not experts of your industry or we are experts, right? But we don't want to come in and pretend that we know everything that's going on within your workplace, that we know the fatigue levels or the burnout levels or the stress levels, right? Or the psychological safety of the environment. Nobody knows that, but we can trust our diagnostic. When we put it out to you, everybody takes part. They answer the questions. Now we've got data-driven information, real-time information that now we can tailor our support based on the findings. This simply will read maybe that, your team are very fatigued right now, they're very stressed right now, right? Or maybe the awareness of stress, that how when I'm stressed, this is what it looks like. These are the symptoms that I get when I'm starting to get stressed. Burnout looks like this, right? So we come out and do the workshop, burnout, stress management, fatigue training, so that they become self-aware. Remember, we're all about health promotion, what we can put in place to optimize high performance working, right? So this diagnostic tool will give us the picture, right? Simply like going for an x-ray, right? Where I like to give these examples so you get clear what I'm trying to talk about, right? So you go for an x-ray, they look at the bone, which part is broken, how broken is it, right? What is the real picture of this body part that we're trying to read? There's the brain scans, there's the stomach, there's the bone, heart, which artery. When you get that x-ray picture, right, we get a clear understanding of the root of the problem. So our Safe Pillars diagnostic is exactly like that. It's coming into your workforce, it's coming into your company or your organization and getting the full picture of what's happening culturally and what's happening stress management wise, fatigue management wise, right? And then based on the findings, the doctor also puts the x-ray up there and looks, right? That's what we do with the diagnostic. We come in now and look and say, okay, these are results, right? This is what we're seeing from your workforce, this is what we're seeing from the leaders, this is what we're seeing from your pilots, this is what we're seeing from your crew. This is the problem, right? And now let's come up with a treatment, right? So we diagnose the bone is really broken. This is the treatment. This is what's happening with the heart. This is the treatment. So when we come in with a diagnostic, we put it up there. This is what we're reading, right? And then we come up with a treatment plan. What do you need? Do you need 4 series workshop, for example? We've got the Safe Pillars 4-week series workshop, which we run within the organization. We have the leadership training, right, which we mental health literacy training, right, which we roll out to our leaders, because we spoke about the first time, right, that they need to have some understanding of mental health, the standard, so that when someone starts to fall out of the standard, you know what that looks like. Remember, so we said you're not becoming, there's no expectation that you become a practitioner, you become a therapist or a counselor. We are now coming in, right, and supporting you so that you can now become mental health literate, right? So that's one of the programs. You can have the mental health literacy program, you can have the 4 series pillar workshop, or right, the diagnostic itself coming in every quarter to continuously check, right? We have this where you go for your yearly annual check, and you have this in your workplace, in your workforce, and within your industries, where there's a physical check every year, right? For example, where you yourself with your GP, you're meant to have a physical check, right? So similarly, the diagnostic can be your quarterly check to make sure things are okay. Your car goes for an engine check. I forgot the technical name now, right? When your car goes for a check to make sure everything's okay, then it goes for maybe it says, it needs oil change, brake fluid is low, whatever the outcome. When they put it on the diagnostic thing, right, and they read that this is what your car needs. The tires, you're left with 50%, so maybe you're left with 80%, so maybe we need to change them, right? So this is how the diagnostic works. It simply gives you a picture of what's happening within your company, and then we put things in place designed specifically tailored for real-time things that are happening within your organization. And these are the things that we'd like to help you put in place to keep your people optimized performance and optimized health. So key takeaways from this episode, right? Awareness is pretty good. It's okay for you to have awareness, but like in aviation, awareness is it's similar to knowing there's turbulence, right? But you not having foundations, right, and frameworks in place is like you now refusing to change the flight plan. You stick to the same scenario, but you've got information telling you that there's something happening here. The question is not about does mental health matter? The question now becomes, have we built support systems within there for sustainability of high performance and health for aviation? Similarly to the resource industry, similar to the corporate environment, we know that reactive change is not enough. We need to move to a stage where we have robust protocols to support the sustainability of our mental health for our workforce that's as rigorous as the technique. This starts with having rigorous framework, not just one-off campaigns. If you are leading a team in the high pressure industry and you want some mental health and resilience support, DM us or book your workplace safety and resilience consultation via the link in the show notes.